Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we examine fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. The Polish Foreign Affairs Ministry issued a statement denouncing the presidential elections in Russia as neither free nor fair. The document said that the vote was held under conditions of severely limited civil liberties, which precluded making a free democratic choice. But not everyone's outraged at the farce that the Russians are calling an election. Emomali Rahman, president of Tajikistan and brown-noser extraordinaire, sent Putin a message of congratulations. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I sincerely congratulate you on your undisputed victory in the presidential elections. Similar congratulations were sent to Moscow from China, North Korea, Belarus, Bolivia, Honduras, and Ecuador. What are they congratulating Putin over? Hard to guess. It's like congratulating a guy known for domestic violence on another successful beating of his wife. Not that long ago, around last June, shortly after the Prigozhin mutiny, most analysts believed that Putin was at his weakest in history. Barely a year has passed, and he's eliminated all of his opponents, so maybe that's what his fellow regimes are congratulating him on. Although he's cut down all of his enemies, he still was too afraid to leave his bunker to vote in the elections. Dictators around the world love to be photographed just outside the voting booth, as the picture helps cement the free and democratic elections narrative that they're trying to push, but Bunker Grandpa here chose another way to vote for himself. News agencies around the world are really trying to paint the mood around elections in a more positive light, reporting about paint spilled into the ballot box or Molotov cocktails thrown at voting precincts. But we're under no such illusion here. The official turnout is reported at 73.33%, which means an uptick from 2018, when it stood at 67%. And so Vladimir Putin will soon begin his fifth presidential term. He already won in 2000, 2004, 2012, and most recently in 2018. Should he serve out the full term, by then he will have ruled Russia as long as Tsar Nicholas I. 10 years ago, on March 18, 2014, Russia tried to legalize its military occupation of Ukrainian Crimea. On that day, a legally void agreement was signed in Moscow that sanctioned the annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol into Russia. To have a pretext for signing the document, Russia held a sham referendum in occupied Crimea 2 days before, on March 16, 2014. A quick breakdown then. The Tsar from you-know-where set his eyes on taking the peninsula, but the problem was that the land belonged to a neighboring country, so an occupation was in order. But to wash himself of any accusation of wrongdoing in the eyes of his public, he held a rigged referendum to ask the people living on the peninsula whether they'd like to officially join and live in Russia. To make sure that the people voted correctly, he deployed troops posing as regular citizens taking things into their own hands. The day after the referendum, Moscow officially announced the results, saying that 96.77% of eligible voters were in favor of reunification with Russia Federation. Few countries in the world recognize the referendum as either legitimate or legally binding, as it violated a number of international law norms and the Constitution of Ukraine. However, mere outrage from the international community was not enough to prevent the Kremlin from moving forward with the annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol, which were concluded to great fanfare 2 days later. As typical Russia for you, paying zero mind to what the world thinks and then steamrolling anyone who dares to stand in his way. On March 19, 2014, the Constitutional Court of Russia ruled the agreement as not violating the Russian Constitution. And on the next day, on March 20th, the Russian State Duma ratified it with only one deputy who currently lives in Ukraine speaking out against it. On March 21st, the treaty was unanimously ratified by Russia's Federation Council, and later that same day, Putin signed the treaty into law. So let's maybe talk about the Ukrainian perspective for a moment. One day, a huge chunk of its land was occupied and then illegally annexed by a much larger neighbor. But what about the international reaction? Was it proportional to the act? Well, given that it was limited to simply refusing to recognize the referendum, we could say that it very much wasn't. There was no sanctions against Russia or against Putin and his cronies. There were just words, outrage, and handwriting. Ukraine was left alone to fend for itself against Russia, which looked poised to grab even more land. The world finally woke up 8 years later, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine and began razing city after city, leaving nothing but death and destruction in its wake. If the world responded with force in 2014, we might have avoided the bloodbath of today. Instead, we have people thinking that World War III is quite possible.
И это вопрос, который беспокоит народа. Как вы считаете, полномасштабный конфликт между Россией и НАТО возможно? И насколько вероятно? Спасибо.
Ну, я думаю, что все возможно в современном мире. Но я уже говорил, и это понятно для всех, что это будет в одном шаге от полномасштабной Третьей мировой войны. Думаю, что в этом вряд ли кто-нибудь заинтересован. Что касается позиции президента Франции, то там уже есть какие-то поправки в том смысле, что этот контингент будет выполнять второстепенные функции, должен будет заниматься подготовкой военных кадров на Украине, разъяснением, как пользоваться западной техникой, ну и некоторые другие функции подобного рода. Сегодня это мало чем отличается от того, что делают наемники. А потом вооруженные, военнослужащие стран НАТО там присутствуют, мы же знаем. Мы слышим и французскую речь, там, и английскую речь. Ничего хорошего в этом нет, прежде всего для них, потому что они погибают.
And to show you that we're not pulling things out of thin air, in the next video, you'll see a Russian occupier who filmed a video in Avdiivka for his girlfriend or wife, announcing where he is and that he's free to take everything there now, especially beer and TVs.
Лариса, я тебя люблю, я в Авдеевке. Вот посмотри, достопримечательности города Авдеевки. Если не верите, симачи, смотрите, я в Авдеевке. Вот поглядите, какой, вот братва размозжила все размозжила. Вот, это Спартак. А вон тот дом, тогда поближе, подойдем, пожалуйста. Вот я иду, Ларис, я вот он я, вот в Авдеевке. Все не верят, я сюда приехал. Ты сам выпросился, сам. Лариса, я тебя люблю, сильно выпросился. Лариска, здесь в этих домах все есть, телевизоры, что только нет. Только надо электричку какую-то грузовую и вывозить отсюда.
Look, the Russians came to Ukraine not for land, not even to fight and die for the Tsar. They just wanted the money and the loot. They're happy to kill if it means that they can get more of that and will keep supporting Putin if he caters to that wish. Now, the question remains, how many people will the Russians have to kill, or how much loot should they grab for the world to finally be clear on throwing the full weight of its support behind Ukraine? And with that, we conclude this episode of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.